and welcome to the Los Angeles Public Library Science, Technology, and Patents Department Best Friends program, Blue Jeans, the Invisible Garment. And before I introduce our presenters, I would just like to let you know what is going on in the Science, Technology, and Patents Department. We have a plethora of activities, and you can always go to lapl.org and look at our events calendar to find out more about these events and see if you need to sign up for any of them. All of the information will be there. We have an adventure hike happening this Saturday at Santa Susana Pass State Historic Park. The 150th anniversary of the library is, we're having a celebration starting Wednesday, December 7, and then continuing throughout much of next year. December 10, culinary historians of Southern California are presenting Poutine on Mars. That's a Zoom program. In the Octavia Lab, our makerspace, we're having a laser cut tarot card demonstration on Thursday, December 15. Another program, what is this? Friday, December 16, lunch with Elizabeth Scott, film noir queen. Our garden club meets at Spring Street Community Garden. That's going to be Saturday, December 17. And then back in the Octavia Lab, same day, Saturday, December 17, 3D modeling and printing for children. And then, as if that wasn't enough, on Saturday, January 7, we're going right into the next year here. Fungi walk and talk at Malibu Creek State Park, mycology program. Another culinary historians of Southern California virtual program Saturday, January 14. Suminagashi paper marbling in the Octavia Lab Makerspace Saturday, January 14, and a New Year celebration throughout the library Saturday, January 21. And actually, that was just to name a few. That was just our department. There is plenty more going on at Central Library. So without further ado, I would like to introduce today's presenters. Rachel Anderson is going to be talking about her upcoming book, Blue Jeans. And Carolyn Purnell will be talking about her upcoming book, Blue Jeans. And Rachel Anderson of the Best Friends Science and Technology Friends Group, Science and Technology Department Friends Group, which she will talk more about, will be interviewing Carolyn. So please welcome Carolyn and Rachel.
Group for, as you said, the Downtown LA Library's Business and Economics, Science, Technology, and Patents departments. And our purpose is both to raise funds for these library departments and to create awareness of the valuable services that they provide to our community, as you can tell from just the small sampling of their services that Megan was just telling us about. I will share more membership information at the end if people would like, but in essence, if you're not already a member of Best Friends, you can email us at best.friends.lapl@gmail.com or go to our website, which is just a longer URL. So best.friends.lapl@gmail.com for membership. And I'm so excited to be speaking with Carolyn Purnell today. She is a historian and author and is going to share some really fascinating insights about the history of an object that is so ever present in our lives that, you know, we almost don't think about it. So take it away, Carolyn.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you so much, Rachel and Megan. Thank you to Best Friends. And also thank you to everyone else who's tuning in. I'm so excited to be here talking about Blue Jeans. So thanks for taking time out of your day to be here with me. As Rachel said, my name is Carolyn Purnell, and I am a historian. So most of my prior research has focused on a field called sensory history, which looks at how perception has changed over time. And in that field of study, I've really learned that the things that we take for granted, the objects and the habits and the assumptions that we kind of think of as second nature, that's really where we find the richest areas for cultural observation. And that's a sentiment that's shared by the editors of the Object Lesson series, which is the series that my Blue Jeans book is part of. And I have to give them a plug. They're so cool. If you haven't read any of these, like here's one on socks, here's one on sewers. They're just wonderful little glimpses into what the editors call books about the hidden lives of ordinary things. And that description is actually initially what drew me to writing about Blue Jeans for the series, because what is more ordinary than blue jeans? So, on worldwide average, people wear jeans at least 3 days a week. And every year, new consumers decide to take the denim plunge. The global jeans market in 2020 was perched around $73 billion. And in 2025, it's anticipated to be just over $100 billion, with even more growth in 2030 to $121.5 billion. And the fastest growth there is in Asia. And all of that is to say, I mean, I think my gut reaction when I started studying blue jeans is like, okay, everyone has blue jeans, great. It seems like a saturated market, right? But it's actually one of the fastest growing markets within fashion. And by 2023, China is poised to become the largest consumer of denim in the world. And blue jeans production truly has become a worldwide operation. So, for example, you might have Uzbekistani and Azerbaijani cotton that gets woven into fabric in China, Pakistan, and India before getting dyed with synthetic indigo from places like Germany and Brazil, which is then cut and sewn by factory workers in places like Vietnam, Hong Kong, and Japan. You might even have a distressing process somewhere else. And then finally, it's shipped to countries across the globe. So we really are looking at a global product here. And jeans are so commonplace that for most people on the planet, putting on a pair of jeans barely even feels like a choice anymore. They're so ubiquitous that they've become almost invisible in day-to-day life. But I want to suggest let's not be fooled, because really that invisibility is a trick. It's like a magic trick that works by misdirection. Blue jeans have managed to convince us that they're perennial. But historically speaking, blue jeans, at least the way that we know them, really aren't that old. They were patented around the same time as the earliest automobiles, but they really only entered the cultural prime time half a century later, well after things like vacuum cleaners or automated washing machines had already taken American homes by storm. And in fact, I think one of the things that's most surprising, if you see this last little dot on the timeline, they weren't even called jeans until the teen lingo of the 1950s and 60s caught on. Prior to that, they tended to be called waist overalls or dungarees. So, as you'll see shortly, jeans have existed for a long time, but the window in which they became such an indispensable part of global fashion, that was really only a matter of decades. And now they have become so indispensable that it's really difficult to remember a time before they were in our wardrobes. So today what I'm going to go over is a very quick overview of how that virtual invisibility came to be. Now, blue jeans are familiar to each and every one of us, but for the most part, their really deep backstory kind of remains a mystery. Levi Strauss tends to get most of the credit for their creation. You know, even in my little timeline here, you can see that. But by the time Levi's signature jeans hit the market, many of the features were actually already standard among work trousers. The Levi's innovation, as they even say on their website, was simply putting rivets into work trousers. So, according to the Oxford English Dictionary, the word jean itself was already in use by 1567. If we really want to get back to the source of these beloved garments, we have to push back at least to the 16th century. But of course, the further back we go with such a commonplace object, the hazier the history gets. So we really, instead of one single origin story, have a kind of constellation of narratives. And what I'm going to present to you today is perhaps the most widely accepted version of that story. So it begins in the Indian village of Dongri, where craft workers produced a sturdy, coarse cotton cloth that during the age of exploration became a popular option for boat sails. And workers would take this cloth after they used it for sails, it would get tattered. They would repurpose the worn out cloth into trousers. And as you can see, dungaree cloth wasn't always blue. And in the book, I go into more detail about why indigo became the signature colorant for jeans. But for now, we're just going to talk about the textile itself. So sailors start wearing this super sturdy cloth as trousers. And during their journeys, a lot of them ended up finding their way to the Italian city of Genoa, which at the time was one of the most powerful ports in the world. And word started spreading about the miraculously durable Indian fabric coming out of Dongri. And soon traders started selling Dongri's namesake textile, dungaree, at a really hefty markup. And as the popularity of the cloth grew, Genoese traders wanted to produce cheaper alternatives for it was a really in-demand product. So they wanted to come up with a cheaper version. And producers started springing up all across Genoa, or as the city was known in French, you can see here, Gênes. And soon that wealthy port city boasted an equally wealthy trade in its own robust cotton fabric. So English traders who were apparently unable or unwilling to say Genoa or Gênes just started calling the new textile jean. And around the same time, France had tended to be the leader of the European textile trade, and they didn't want to be outdone by Genoa, so they started devising their own sturdy cloth in the southeastern city of Nîmes. And they produced a cotton wool blend that was known as serge de Nîmes. And once again, English tongues craved a simpler version, so the fabric's name was shortened just to denim. And at their inception, jean and denim were distinct fabrics. Both were woven with two threads. They were woven with warp and weft. But typically, jean tended to be made with two threads of the same color, which meant that the color was consistent throughout the garment. Denim, on the other hand, required one dyed thread and one white thread, which explains why the interior of most jeans today is lighter than the exterior. But over time, that slight difference between the two cloths shaded into kind of inconsequential trivia, and jeans eventually in the 1950s and 60s, as we saw, came to refer to the style of trousers, while denim referred to the fabric. So here we are perched in the 16th century. We now have these signature textiles, but it actually took another few centuries for the United States to enter the story with Levi Strauss's distinctive minor pants. And he patented these in 1873. The pair that you can see here actually was recently discovered by a denim hunter. Michael Allen Harris goes to abandoned mine shafts. Mostly he actually even searches for fragments of denim, which he can then resell, historical denim. But here in this particular mine, he found the mother lode and found an almost entirely intact pair of 1880s Levi's. They auctioned these off in October at an auction in New Mexico. Two vintage clothing collectors pooled their money and they bought this pair for $76,000. And they are planning to hang on to it because they think the value will only appreciate. This is one of the oldest intact pairs that we have. Because most people tend to know, if they know anything about blue jeans, they know about Levi Strauss. So for time's sake, I'm going to skip a little bit of that here. But mainly, I want to get across that Levi Strauss never imagined that his trousers would go mainstream the way that they did. And I really don't think he could have fathomed that someone would have paid $76,000 for a pair of them in 2022. When he created them, he thought of them as work garments, and they were very successful in that market. But, obviously we are all wearing jeans today. So what happened? What really pushed jeans firmly into the mainstream in America? And if we had to sum up the story in just a few words, the answer would be the Great Depression. Because when the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl hit, workers who were struggling to feed their families were no longer in the market to buy blue jeans. And denim companies knew that if they wanted to stay in business, they would have to find new customers. And so they very quickly pivoted their attention to middle class buyers. And at the time, a lot of middle class Americans had already formed a pretty romantic view of the American West, thanks to the popularity of Hollywood Westerns. And during the 1930s, this kind of fascination with the Old West hit a fever pitch, and hundreds of dude ranches started popping up all over the country, catering to tourists who wanted rustic outdoor adventures. And denim companies like Levi's happily jumped on that bandwagon. So here you can kind of see some advertisements with, some very obviously city slickers who are hanging out with lassos and riding horses and learning the ways of the Old West, flirting a little bit. So you get a very romanticized view of the cowboy life in these images. And denim companies really consciously, as I say, marketed this new demographic to this new demographic. They also found a breakthrough market in women as well in this period. And in 1934, Levi's launched the first line of jeans specifically for women called Lady Levi's. In the following year, these garments were so successful that Vogue started featuring them as a must-have for any East Coast dudeen who wanted to head west for a ranch vacation. One thing I love about this ad, the text is probably too tiny for you to see, but it says that the overalls are being sold at the dude ranch department of a certain department store. And I love the idea that there would even be a dude ranch department in the first place, which attests to the popularity of this look and of this trend. So by the 1930s, you can see that blue jeans and the American West were already kind of working as natural partners, and they were, forever welded together in the popular imagination. One of the ironies of this that I think is kind of funny is that actually before this trend of Hollywood movies about the Old West and of the dude ranches, a lot of actual cowboys didn't tend to wear jeans. They tended to wear wool trousers. So it was really an image that was kind of cultivated through media. And then cowboys ultimately did adopt blue jeans, but it really didn't work the way that I think a lot of people imagine, with cowboys wearing them first. Another irony about this blue jeans trajectory is that their outsider status as the attire of frontier toughs and down and out workers actually helped push them even more firmly into the limelight of American culture. So during the 1940s, youth started looking to break free of rigid social norms. And one of the ways they did that was by wearing denim. So supporters of the socialist movement started adopting blue jeans as a sign of solidarity with the working class. You see them start cropping up on artists or edgy undergraduates, intellectuals. So blue jeans kind of entered in this subversive kind of way in the 1940s. And then demand only continued to grow in the 1950s as celebrities like Marlon Brando, James Dean, Elvis Presley, Marilyn Monroe started wearing fitted blue jeans. And they kind of gathered this rebel status as well. So young people across America started flocking to this kind of casual, cool look, and shocked parents tended to respond with outrage, which, if you look in the Levi's archives, there are actually some really wonderful letters from incensed parents saying, like, how could you tell my kid that they could wear jeans to school? They're not right for school. All of these kinds of like infuriated responses. But of course, if you've ever met a teenager, you know that the more a parent does such things, the more inclined the teenager is to wear the garment in question. So, by the end of the 50s, jeans had kind of been associated with this cool, rebellious image. And by the time the 1960s hit, they moved on. They graduated even from that teenage, angsty, rebellious phase to becoming a full-on symbol of protest. Jeans were synonymous with refusing the status quo. For example, as you can see here, some young Black female civil rights activists decided to toss aside their quote unquote respectable clothing, and they decided to wear jeans or denim skirts or overalls as a nod to the clothing and cultural legacy of Black sharecroppers. It was their way of kind of protesting an unjust history, and again, showing solidarity. Halfway across the globe in the same moment, blue jeans were, playing a role for Soviet youth who saw them as a sign of freedom. So, according to Soviet hardliners, blue jeans were a symbol of excess. They were indicative of materialistic desire and capitalism run rampant. But youth still wanted to wear them because they associated them with American freedom. And they often would try to get jeans that had the biggest pockets possible, because apparently in the USSR, pockets were always hidden inside, and visible pockets was a sign of like how liberated you were. But trade restrictions actually made it virtually impossible for Soviet youth to get their hands on real, authentic blue jeans. And if they did manage, and if they wore them out in public, they were often expelled from university or fired. And there were even worse punishments awaiting those who decided to sell blue jeans on the black market. So there is an American denim brand called Rokotov and Feinberg that commemorates two Soviet activists who were executed, and not entirely because of selling blue jeans on the black market, but that was one of the reasons cited in the court case that led to them being executed. So blue jeans had this very potent meaning when they first really hit the cultural mainstream of being a rebellious, resistant garment. But obviously, when we wear them today, for the most part, they now symbolize a kind of mainstream culture. When you slip on a pair of jeans in the morning, chances are you're not looking to buck a trend. You're looking to just rely on a closet staple. So the next kind of question in this evolution is, how did that happen? How did they become so normalized? And one place that we can look to see how this happened, not just in America, but across the globe, is by looking at blue jeans history in Japan. So when blue jeans first made inroads into Japan during the occupation of Japan in the 40s, they were known as jipan, or GI pants, because they were such an essential part of American soldiers' wardrobes. And jeans sold like wildfire because American clothing was symbolically a way to break from traditional norms. So even here we have that rebellious element. Secondhand stores, which is where the American denim tended to be sold, they couldn't keep up with demand. And so prices of American denim in Japan during this period were sky high. They became actually a kind of symbol, not just of rebellion, but of the elite youth, because they were pretty much the only ones who could afford them. But once post-war manufacturing surged and global trade resumed after the occupation, it became a lot easier for denim-hungry consumers to find the cuts that they craved. And as jeans became more available, they also started becoming more acceptable. And as they became more acceptable, then they began to lose their distinctive Americanness. And so we soon see Japanese consumers flocking to blue jeans, not because they wanted to be American, but because they wanted to be like their Japanese peers. So from their perspective, once jeans became a readily available garment, they were now mass produced and you could buy them in very easily in stores. That meant they were just as Japanese as any other piece of clothing. And we actually see this pattern happening in other places, where they come in with a kind of rebellious moment and then they get co-opted and then become very normalized and accepted. So the anthropologist Daniel Miller has charted blue jeans adoption rates in Kannur, India, which is part of Kerala. And it's one of the areas in the world that still has one of the lowest rates of blue jeans adoption. I think it's somewhere around 5% of people wear them in public. But when he interviewed people in Kannur about the kinds of associations they had with blue jeans, what he found was kind of interesting. Most people assumed or claimed that they were Indian garments. And very few people, actually only one or two that he talked to, really attach them to America in any distinctive way, which suggests that jeans, as they've expanded to new markets, they've lost a lot of their culturally specific resonance. They've truly become global rather than American as they began. And so we kind of see this pattern happening in countries across the world. And they started earning a title as the world's favorite clothing item, not just America's. Another thing that has really helped that process is the growth of industrial global capitalism. So mass production has lowered the manufacturing costs of blue jeans, which of course lowers the price point. But it also raises the visibility of the garment. So if you take, for example, one of the world's largest denim plants is called Arvind. They're headquartered in India, and the company produces textiles for brands like Lee, Tommy Hilfiger, Calvin Klein, Gap. And Arvind employs more than 30,000 people within India. They're starting to expand operations elsewhere as well. And it's not too hard to imagine if your entire livelihood comes from manufacturing a single garment, soon you very well may start wearing that garment, and especially if it's known for being cheap and durable and suitable for hard work. And what we see is Arvind is a juggernaut in the industry, but it is far from the only mega corporation paying its bills through denim production. So we also have major centers of blue jean production in places like Mexico, Myanmar, Tanzania, Bangladesh, Nicaragua, Pakistan, Brazil, and China. So what we're seeing here is that the more global the scale of production becomes, the more global the product itself becomes. So really that's how blue jeans kind of becomes normalized over just a matter of a few decades. And all of that is to say that jeans history is kind of marked by this distinctive pattern. They come in all rebellious and then they quiet down into ordinary acceptance. And this back and forth of rebellion and adoption is not just characteristic of the history of blue jeans as a whole, but also of a lot of the different trends that we see in different styles of blue jeans. So time and again, something will emerge as a countercultural symbol, get adopted into the mainstream, and lose its political resonance. We see that happening actually quite readily with punk denim. So when punks hit the scene in the 70s, they had these ripped up safety pin studded denim that was all about making a kind of revolutionary statement. But very quickly, capitalism kind of gobbled that statement up. Mass media started bringing punk heroes, punk style, punk music into the public eye, and savvy retailers figured out how they could commercialize that signature look. So people no longer had to painstakingly stitch patches onto their jeans if they wanted to be punk for a day. They could just hustle over to a store and buy something off the rack. And as the commercialization of a subculture escalates, the original message, the original ideology gets watered down. And a look that once stood for something political becomes little more than just a fashionable look. And that's why we can kind of see this pattern happening with punk, where you can probably, to put it in the bluntest terms, buying a Sex Pistols t-shirt at Hot Topic or a runway-ready Vivienne Westwood corset is a far cry from supporting the idea that the English monarchy is a fascist regime, which was, a signature part of what the Sex Pistols were saying. So you can kind of see this, again, the rebellion, the co-optation, and then the normalization. And punk is just one example of many. It's I don't have time to go into a lot of examples, but in the book, I talk about how blue jeans' relationship to not just economic class and political ideology, but also to gender, to race, to sexuality, to religion, it has all fallen into this characteristic to and fro pattern. Just to give you a few examples, it's happened with all kinds of jeans trends like bell bottoms, sagging, super low rise jeans, Y2K embellished denim, the rise of hijabsters, which are hijabi hipsters, and even the cutout denim trends that we were seeing right before the pandemic. And I do unpack some more of those in the book. But in a nutshell, what we can see is that the history of blue jeans can really be read as a never ending conversation, bouncing back and forth between different poles of power. So they are both casual and catwalk worthy. They are both ordinary and transgressive. They are durable and disposable. They are sexy and slouchy. They are masculine and feminine. They are timeless and trendy. They are global and regional. They are normcore and distinctive. And they are liberating and confining. So, blue jeans really, at the end of the day, are an exercise in opposites. There is a kind of ideological restlessness in blue jeans. They carry so much meaning and so many different meanings. And as jeans have become more normalized across the globe, those meanings have only continued to multiply. So, just last year, North Korean leader Kim Jong un banned skinny jeans as a symbol of what he called a capitalistic lifestyle. So, clearly, blue jeans are still a potent cultural symbol. More than a century after they were created, the ideological battles around them rage on. And if anything, I would say jeans have taken on more significance over time, which is partly why they're such high ticket collector's items. So if we go back to this $76,000 pair I showed you at the beginning of the talk, its price tag is not the only reason that it's notable. So I'm going to show there is a label inside, which the text is tiny. Even when it's maximized, it's really hard to see. But the Levi's label here stresses that this jean is the only kind made by white labor. And that message appeared on the label after Congress passed the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882 amid widespread anti-Chinese racism. So San Francisco, which is home to Levi's, drew a large number of Chinese immigrants in the 19th century, and white workers started viewing those immigrants as competition. So this label inside these jeans was a response to the social pressure that Levi's felt from whites not to hire Chinese workers. So one thing we can see, even in this one pair of jeans, you have an accretion of so many different layers of history, of so many different values, and so many uses. And they are still accreting meaning, as they go on to their life with whoever this collector is and future collectors. So I began the talk by saying that blue jeans have practically become invisible to us. But here I am saying that they're also full of meaning. Yet this is another one of blue jeans' many contradictions. Because when a single object symbolizes so many different conflicting ideas, emotions, and purposes, it almost ceases to represent any of them in a really definitive way. The anthropologist Marc Auger has coined the term non-places to describe places that erase the specifics of history or of cultural specificity. So no matter who you are or where you are, you can kind of navigate these places. They kind of intuitively make sense. You can think of it like airports or shopping malls. And in the book, I argue that blue jeans have become a kind of non-garment. They are saturated with history, but over time, they have managed to take on an appearance of being global and timeless and cultureless and classic. And over the last 150 years, blue jeans have become a kind of universal signifier. They're really ready to fit pretty much any context, any meaning, any body. And they have gained such a wide array of meanings that we've started taking that complex tangle for granted. And we kind of go about our daily lives acting as if a garment that means so much actually kind of means nothing. So my invitation today would be that it would be so wonderful if we could start seeing jeans again, kind of seeing them as this complicated tangle, because I think that the more we can recognize the meaning in the objects that we take for granted, the more we can really appreciate their immense power. So thank you. Still on mute.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. That was incredible. So I know there's so much more in your book, but there was so much in the past,
Packed a lot.
just so much to learn and realize about the history and just how global and sort of universal as well as hyper-specific this one garment can be. It is amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So I have a couple questions for you, and then we'll open it up to questions from viewers. But I wanted to know, blue jeans today, like they really do represent such a full spectrum of identity messages, from like prep to punk, mom jeans to dad jeans. Is there any other garment that you think occupies this non-space or could, or is blue jeans' role unique and irreplaceable?
I mean, it's such a good question, and it's one I kept trying to think about as I was writing the book, because I do think blue jeans are unique in this, and the closest I could come up with to an analog would be something like a t-shirt, because it's global, it's casual, it's basic, it has flexible meaning. You can buy super expensive ones, you can buy cheap ones. But the thing about t-shirts that I think is different is actually, one thing I think is different is their legibility. So while you can buy a plain t-shirt, we often design t-shirts specifically to advertise something, either about a brand or about ourselves, or a slogan, some kind of thing we want people to read about us. Whereas I feel like jeans advertise those same values, but they do it in a much quieter way. And I think in that way, they manage to skirt this line, or these many lines, in a much more subtle, subconscious way. And I think that, for example, one of those lines is the dressy line. I think t-shirts, yes, you can have an expensive t-shirt, but we still don't really think of a t-shirt as dressy. Whereas I know people who have dress jeans, and they would wear them to like fancy occasions. So I think that blue jeans are even more flexible because they don't state their purpose quite so obviously. But, yeah.
That's so interesting. Do you think that we still have colors associated with status, or have, this is something that you brought up in the book, which I'm was lucky enough to read in advance. But, in addition to kind of the sort of bells and whistles signifying status, do you think that color, still has any of that identity, and the blueness of jeans is important, or have the Industrial Revolution and synthetic dyes completely eliminated that method of proclaiming one's place in the world?
Yeah. So, as you mentioned in the book, I do talk a lot about the blueness of blue jeans, and history of color is one of my other areas of research. And so I think, for a huge chunk of human history, colors had a very clear bearing upon your social status. So they were either, if you wore a super saturated color, it was because it was rare. You were showing off your wealth, that you could afford this super, expensive, rare color. Once the Industrial Revolution happened, there's a kind of leveling of the playing field. Like, you no longer have to be of a certain social status to be able to afford a certain color, because, you can be a seamstress and wear purple. You can suddenly afford it. It's not this rare, exclusive thing. But I do think that status still has a huge part to play in the colors that I do think we still have a color hierarchy status-wise. So it just doesn't work the same way. It's more tied to the idea of good taste than it is to high cost. So I would say, and a lot of art historians have argued, that there is a phenomenon called chromophobia, or fear of colors, that has predominated, especially in modernity in the West, and that quite often what get called so-called neutral colors or muted palettes are often taken as being more indicative of one's high taste or intellectual capabilities. So, an example of that would be look at the branding on an Apple store. It's all white, and we see it as high class, as minimal, as clean, as intelligent. Or I actually, please, if you have not seen this, go Google Kim Kardashian's home. She has children and it's entirely beige, like everything. And so I think that, there are so many examples I could point to where I think this idea of a muted palette being more refined has sort of emerged as a stand-in to where it's almost a 180, where rich colors used to be the sign of status because they cost more. Now muted ones are there because they're a sign supposedly of intellectual or moral restraint. And it manifests in the weirdest ways. Like Zillow recently had a survey where they showed that homes with these neutral palettes sell for thousands of dollars more than the exact same home that is not in a neutral palette. You can see it even in like mega brands like McDonald's, who used to have this like glorious red and yellow everywhere kind of playhouse-y fun palette. And now if you go to a McDonald's, it's like brown cladding or slate outside. It's much more neutral because they're trying to shed the cheapness of their image. So yeah, I do think that we still have social hierarchies manifested through color, but it's kind of flipped.
That's so interesting to think about. And on a similar note, and again, this is something that you dive into in much more depth in your book, but originally indigo, which was the only way to dye things that signature blue, was very labor intensive, very expensive, very coveted. And one of our board members wondered if blue jeans were ever dyed with the original indigo that was produced in his birthplace of India, or if jeans became blue only after cheaper synthetic dyes became popular. And I know most of what you showed us was still blue, but what did you find in your research?
Yeah, so that is a great question. And actually, early blue jeans were definitely dyed with indigo. And Indian indigo in particular was the most coveted because it was considered the highest scale. So there were other major producers of indigo in the Caribbean, in American colonies, Dutch colonies in Southeast Asia. But a lot of that indigo was seen as inferior, so it would have gone to the cheaper blue jeans. But the 1880s pair that I showed that just recently sold, that would have been dyed with actual indigo.
Wow.
Oddly enough, synthetic indigo was one of the last synthetic colors to be created. It was one of the hardest for chemists to figure out how to synthesize. So there wasn't even a good version of it on the market until about 1897. So about 4 decades after other colors had been synthesized. And even then it took a while to catch on. So yeah, a lot of the first blue jeans were made with actual real indigo.
Amazing. I mean, they really were, they were these garments that were meant to last for so long,
Yeah.
it was worth it, I guess.
Yeah. And indigo is really cool because, it doesn't adhere to a lot of fabrics very well, but it has this magic relationship with cotton, actually, where it does stick and it stays blue. It doesn't lose its color. It can fade, but it won't change hues.
Mm-hmm.
And indigo indigo and cotton had a big boom at the same time economically. So they were kind of like this tag team wonder force that, hit the 17th and 18th century market at the same time. And I should also say that both of them were, huge sources of exploitation for, slaves and indentured servants, and all kinds of other people were forced to produce this colonial subjects. So there's a lot of darkness that goes in there, but they really rose in tandem.
Yeah. And, with that sort of understanding that somewhat dark history, how do you feel about the jeans in your closet? Or do you feel like you'd rather not have jeans in your closet? How does that work for you?
It's, I have conflicted feelings. I think, funny enough, I was never a huge blue jeans wearer before I started researching this book. I think I was more interested in them as an object than as a thing I wore. But since writing the book, I've acquired 2 pairs of blue jeans, 2 more. I already had one. But I have resolved to hang on to them a lot longer. Like, because of that fast fashion thing I was talking about earlier, I've decided that they're going to be objects I really cling to. I didn't want super trendy denim. But I have to say, when I put them on now, I think about them differently. I get a little burst of wonder where I'm like, wow, you are so much more than I gave you credit for, jeans. So I think it's a mixed bag where it's like, I am glad I can appreciate those layers, but I also acknowledge that they have a bleak past and a bleak present, because the people who make them are often, subject to health complaints, or they aren't paid very much. So, yeah, I try to deal with that conflict internally by, hanging on to them a lot longer, cherishing them.
Yeah, and I have to imagine, that a lot of people watching today will feel the same way. Knowing the immense amount of production and travel and manufacturing,
Oh my gosh, they're better traveled than I am. It's like they've seen more of the world than me.
Exactly. All right. Well, let's see if we have some questions from the audience. I see one, so I'm just gonna share that so far, and then if anyone else has questions from the live audience, please leave them in the comments. So Toby says, "What a terrific presentation on a fascinating topic." Are there any other garments or fabrics that have proliferated globally and taken on meta meanings in a similar way? And yeah, I think it's separate from what I asked before, specifically.
Yeah.
What do you say there?
I mean, it's related to the t-shirt question you asked before, but I think that one thing I didn't mention that I think another super underrated garment in terms of the way we think about it are socks. Um, there is, as I showed earlier, an object lessons book on socks. So I'm going to give a plug for Kim Adrian's book on socks as well. But I think that they also have so much power to cross cultures and tell us things about class and about, they reveal so much more than I think we give them credit for. I don't think they function in the same way as blue jeans, with that kind of like opposing meanings battle that happens back and forth. But I do think socks, specifically Kim Adrian talks about them as an object of desire, and how socks have a specific kind of comfort value, but then there's also there can be a luxury value. And so I think that we impute a lot of desire to socks, even though I don't think about them much on a daily basis. So I would just say maybe that would be another interesting garment that we all wear but don't think about a lot. That doesn't
so many
function in the same way.
associations with different ones and different kinds, and
Yeah. And I mean, I know that, I would be fascinated. I know that not all cultures really are into socks. And so I would be fascinated to like read more about, which cultures wear them, which don't. I think there's probably a cool anthropology out there I haven't found. But yeah, now maybe I need to go do more thinking about socks.
There's going to be a volume 2.
Oh gosh, no.
Amazing. We'll see if any other comments pop up from the audience. And then I also want to hand things back to Megan from LAPL, who I know had a few notes to share in closing.
Yes, I wanted to let everyone know that they can pre-order Carolyn's book at bookshop.org. And also the library ordered the book. So when it is released in January, it will be available. You can place a reservation for it now in our system. But when it's released, then you will be one of the first people to check it out. So that is an option as well. But of course, if you want to read and reread this amazing piece of literature, you will want to order it from bookshop.org. And there's actually a link to ordering it in the comments. And I think that might be about it. I would like to say thank you so much to Carolyn Purnell. That was really fascinating. And to Rachel Anderson, thank you so much for interviewing and helping out. And this was really wonderful. I learned a ton. And I'm already like madly scribbling things down to tell my husband and other people in my life about blue jeans. I'm really excited.
Well, thank you again for hosting this event and for being such a wonderful organization. So I really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you so much, Carolyn, and thank you to the amazing team at the Central Library who facilitated this event. We so appreciate all your work to bring this event to life. And yeah, encourage everyone to pre-order the book, put it on hold at the library. Check out Best Friends if you'd like to support all the work that we do. And share this with your friends and family. The recording should be up on LAPL's YouTube soon. So if anyone missed it, they can check it out later. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.